I'm psychologist Dr. Brian Violet, and in this week's Center in a Movie, I'll be sitting down with author and podcaster Bobby Angel as we discuss his movie choice, Gladiator. This is the Catholic Center Show.
You'll see them again, but not yet.
Not yet. Not yet.
Let's talk about Gladiator.
Dr. Brian, what we do in life echoes in eternity.
It's true. That's a constant theme throughout. Even as the film begins and he's walking through the field of grass with his fingers like brushing up against it. I mean, it's ultimately the last scene. Mm-hmm. And it plays with ideas of time and eternity and beginnings and endings and participating in divine realities while still in time and space. And yeah, spiritual film. Why'd you pick it?
It's my go-to film of if I only had one movie, that's it.
That's number one.
It's number one.
High praise.
Yeah. I mean, from soundtrack to story to execution. And I'll tell you, and you can psychoanalyze this till the cows come home. I saw this movie when I was 17 with my dad. The first rated R movie I saw. This movie I saw with my dad when I was 17, and it was this like male initiation of sorts. Like, this is what it looks like to be a man.
Yeah. I mean, certainly Maximus embodies some type of masculinity. I mean, he's an interesting character. He's an archetype for competency, for courage, not that much fear. He pretty much faces death, just by looking it in the eye. Just like a real overt engagement with that which is evil. Strength and honor, right? That's his pledge to all of his soldiers. He's a leader that is willing to risk himself. He doesn't sit behind the safety of his lines. The most danger. I was watching that first scene, and he was talking about firing the arrows, and Quintus is like, "Well, that's going to cause a risk for the cavalry," and he's like, "A necessary risk." And you don't know at that moment that he's in the cavalry.
Right.
Like, he leads that charge. And I think soldiers often respect those leaders who are willing to get down and dirty with them, just like a child respects the parent who does the task that they're making the child do when the child doesn't want to do it, when they do it with them. So take the trash out. Because I said so. Well, that doesn't work. I don't want to take the trash out. Okay, you don't have to take it out. Permissive parenting, that's the other extreme, right? The healthy parenting is, I know you don't want to take the trash out. I know you've had a hard day, but I want to teach you responsibility. So go take it out, and I'm going to walk out and take it out with you, so I'm not lording over you. I would not ask you to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And that's what I think Maximus embodies. And that's why he commands so much loyalty from his troops.
He knows his men. He's willing to not just be in there with him, but lead the charge.
Yes.
And then the zero desire for vainglory afterwards. It was usually whoever got to Caesar, whoever got to the king first would claim the credit for the battle,
Yeah.
And Maximus wants none of it.
No, he just wants to go home.
Wants to go home.
See his boy, make love to his wife, till his fields, reap the harvest.
Too, and if I'm ever tight-lipped about Jackie and I, if I'm ever like some some people are much more gushy about their significant other. Um,
Yeah.
there's time and place for it, and in my own like interior journey, like okay, I've integrated some kind of stoicism that like is almost maybe too rigid of masculinity, that I've had to kind of look at and examine. But there's that their moment where he's like, what do you say to your son, who at this point his son and his wife have been killed, and his friend's like, do you like pray for them? He's like, yeah. And he's like, what do you say to your son? You believe you'll meet them again? He said, I tell him to ride with his heels low and whatever. He's like, and what do you say to your wife? He's like, that is not your business.
And they
That
laugh together.
they laugh together, and there's this common male to male moment of like, this is sacred between a husband and wife, and there's times to affirm and gush and show the world how proud I am of my wife, but there's a lot of things that's no one else's business.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about some characters here. Thoughts on Proximo? What do you think of Proximo?
Proximo is a delight, which he's kind of
He's
like
funny.
he's funny.
He's very funny.
But as a character, as one who again is just kind of, I've paid my dues, I'm free, I'm here to make a living and have pleasure, through Maximus have growing a moral compass. Like the emperor killed the man who set you free.
And you think that was the turning point?
That was,
because it seemed to me it felt a little quick from I'm just here to make money to I'm willing to die to set Maximus free.
sure. There's a director's cut of the film too, which elongates more of the senators and their workings to undermine Commodus.
Yeah.
Proximo, I think he gets a little more footage, but I think it is kind of a quicker turn.
It's a corrective emotional experience.
Yeah, and I think if nothing else, that is that moment of like, this is what Commodus did, and if nothing else moves you, just know this. So whether or not he knew it was going to lead to his death, you got to imagine it probably did at that moment. He unlocked the gates for Maximus anyway.
Well, they saw him, right? They saw him do that, so he knew he was signing his own death warrant right there.
But at that point, I think too, there's the moment of like, all I have left is pleasure. I've tasted enough of it, so I guess I'll die for something good.
Yeah. Oh, it's noble. What does Maximus say to him? Are you in danger of becoming a good man? Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah. And he just scoffs and walks away.
Yeah, he doesn't like it. Let's talk about Commodus. I mean,
one of the best like three-dimensional villains in that sense of like how he's embodied by Joaquin Phoenix.
I don't think that movie is nearly as good with a different actor. I think his acting carries the film. I think Maximus has an important stoicism about him.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like the Batman character, which needs the Joker.
Right.
And he was, I mean, the range. And I remember watching this. I mean, now incest isn't a big deal in film, right? I mean, you have Game of Thrones now. But I remember when that first came out, that was pushing boundaries with his sister and his desire for her. And there's a creepiness about him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was terrifying. He's terrifying and unpredictable villain. And also immature. Very immature. Those moments where things don't go his way, he is a little boy.
Right.
And overall, he's a little boy.
I mean, it's the tragic, crying for just the affirmation and love of his father to the point where he will commit patricide.
Well, right before he kills him is that interesting moment. He says, Marcus Aurelius is on his knees and he says, "Your faults as a son are my failures as a father." He says that in response to Commodus saying, hey, I may not have these virtues, but can you love me for these virtues? Like, am I lovable? Affirm my existence. And his father says, no, you're a failure, but it
I
is my
know.
fault. It's like, it's actually a criticism.
Right.
And then he kills him.
Yeah. And then rewatching, it's like, your existence is my failure as a dad. It's like, that doesn't help.
It's happening and it's happening right now. It's the most meta of statements. He is failing him in that moment when when Commodus is the most vulnerable. His father is failing him by not saying, I love you and you are good. He's saying you're a failure.
Well, and how Maximus is fathered by Marcus Aurelius.
Maybe.
Man, I mean,
I've got. Go ahead.
In the sense of like whatever fatherly energy he had went to Maximus.
Right, and I'm actually kind of hard on Marcus Aurelius,
Sure,
because he basically got to reap the harvest of another father's hard work in having a good son in Maximus. He did. I mean, sure, he was fatherly to him once he became a soldier and a general, but it's not as if he was, emotionally present to Maximus during his early development, like he wasn't to Commodus. Like, he is a failed father, and he's a bit narcissistic. Father loved me. Well, it's my fault that you suck. Like, I don't know. Marcus Aurelius the Wise, I think he had his flaws. And even his daughter, he said, would you, what kind, you would be a cunning, I think he said you'd be a cunning Caesar, but would you be just? And she says, I would be whatever you want me to be. Isn't that the words of a child of a narcissistic parent? I'm not so high on him. I think he had some issues. And I mean, he's probably an emotionally distant dad. I think being Caesar, I have compassion for him. Being Caesar probably comes with a lot of temptation to believe your own hype. I get it. You're the ruler of 25% of the global population, and you've conquered and conquered and conquered, and you get to this point of disillusionment in your elder years. What is it all for? But all along the way, I mean, I imagine he wasn't a family man.
And there's film Caesar, there's historical Caesar. Who knows the in between? But even just looking at like the modern British royal family, it's like wounds on top of wounds. And
Yes,
can anyone nourish a family with that kind of limelight and they come out healthy and integrated? I don't know. Like, I think there's but you have to be so intentional about it. But there too is yeah, I mean, you rewatch it, you watch the film as a young man, and it's a cool movie.
Yes.
The action's great, and there's the stoic masculine embodied on screen who knows his identity, who's fights to his last breath. It's inspiring. And then you watch it years later with the eyes of being a dad and more psychology in your toolbox. And it's like, like father wounds left and right. And again, Maximus as the model of, well, let's not say model, but like a figure of security. Like, he knows who he is, and that's why that speech he gives is so like resonating for men. It's like, my name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the Felix legions, armies of the north, husband to a murdered wife, father to a murdered son, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next. It's like, that's a guy who knows who he is.
Yes, I wanted to talk to you about that. Vengeance and revenge. I couldn't help but think that this is the precursor to John Wick. That this film, like John Wick, is essentially the same premise. And it's a badass, hyper masculine, highly skilled warrior / assassin that wins almost no matter what, wins every fight, and kills a lot of people along the way out of love for a dead spouse.
Right.
And so how do you, so it's interesting, this play on vengeance and mercy. Even Commodus was not actually merciful, but he thought that he could earn love by mimicking mercy, the mercy of Maximus, which I don't know that it really was as much as it was defiance of the emperor in that moment, but then he was coined Maximus the Merciful.
Right.
And so Commodus is like, wait a second, I can be merciful too. Right? Remember when he spares the daughter? Am I not merciful? It's one of those famous lines from the film. Am I not merciful? That and are you not entertained? Those resound throughout film history. But mercy is an interesting thing, and this is a movie about revenge. How do you reconcile that with your Catholic faith?
Being put on the spot, I don't know.
Well, okay. Well, I don't want to expect like this, like well-developed, thoughtful answer, but just as you're sitting here, do you sort of, is that a secondary detail for you? You don't actually haven't really thought through whether or not that's the most Catholic, or is there, can we see it as, I mean, we could delve into that and say, well, maybe it's more justice than revenge, but just in your historical viewing of it, have you thought about the vengeance dimension? Are you a vengeful man? Do you identify with it? Like,
maybe this, it was like when you asked me pick a movie, it was either Gladiator or The Dark Knight. So, I mean, vengeance or Hans Zimmer as the soundtrack was going to play a pivotal role in the decision. Those are some of my two favorite movies. Joaquin Phoenix would go on to play the Joker later. So that's a funny thread.
Yeah.
Connective tissue there.
Yeah.
I think with Maximus, there's not this like long thought out, I will do this, which will lead to this, which will lead me to get before the emperor. I think he's just continually put in these positions where this is now what I have to do to survive. And it keeps putting him closer to the emperor. And so it's not this like long drawn thought out plan of vengeance. It's more what is being placed before him and trying to do the honorable thing, even to the point it's like it's more self-defense at a certain point.
Yeah, I think there's interesting conceptions of honor, because remember when Commodus says to his sister, if he's threatening to take her son's life, and one of the threats he tosses her way is, if you choose to do the honorable thing and take your own life,
right,
I will kill your son. So we would say maybe not honorable to commit suicide, but the virtues of the time might be slightly different, right? Because he was an honorable man.
How honors, changed in time and throughout cultures for sure. But I've never, maybe this is where I have room to grow, is I've never looked at Gladiator as like a long like tale of vengeance. I think it plays.
It's a tale of justice.
I'd say maybe justice. Like it plays out that way. Like he's sold into slavery. Well, he's left for dead. He's sold into slavery. And he just happens to keep incrementally getting closer and closer by just trying to survive to the emperor. And I mean, one of my favorite lines too, I'm glad I didn't forget this, is when his friend tells him, he's like, you have a great name. They will have to kill your name before they kill you.
Yes.
And isn't that like just the like our name, our reputation, like who we are, our honor as men? Like if you lose that, it's so hard to regain it. And we're in such a trigger happy cancel culture now, where if you do something, a whiff of, you may not even done anything wrong, but if you get accused or if you get whatever, it's like your name is tarnished. Just the power of like in your name. And I have friends too that go down the rabbit hole of like your name having like the etymology of your name having like divine mission attached to it, and that can be there. But just like the power in like your name, I love it. But even like the final speech, like, is Rome worth one good man's life? Like, honor him. Every time it's like, yes. And you pray like, I just pray like to, that's also too like, you want to be that kind of man. There's that the Saving Private Ryan at the very end, where he's by the graveside, and his friends, his soldiers have passed on. And he looks at his wife. He's like, "Am I a good man? Like, have I earned the life I've been given?" And there's that like the beckoning of, "Am I a good man? Like, have I lived a life worth honoring?" And then to the Christian point of like, have so yeah, to the Christian point of the desire to hear that, "Well done, good and faithful servant," at the end of all things. To then the perfectionistic part of me, it's like, have I done enough to earn that "Well done, good and faithful servant"?
Affirmation.
That affirmation. And it's not about earning it. It's about being it. It's about allowing yourself to be loved, like filled up with the grace of God. To allow any disordered attachments to be burned away. It's not about have I won enough battles. It's not about my accolades. Have I earned that final trophy? Have you received the Father's love?
Yeah, and all those tasks are secondary to who you are. I mean, who you are, you carry that with you across contexts. So the affirmation for who you are is like the ultimate affirmation. So whether it's this battle or the next or this task or whatever it is, it's just good that you exist and who you are carries with you. So that's what that affirmation is about. It's who you are that I'm happy about, that I'm proud of. That's what we all long for. That's the Father's blessing. And Maximus gets it. How do you feel about the dream of Rome? Talk a lot about the dream of what Rome is, the Republic of Rome.
My friends and I quote that all the time. Like, there was a dream once that was America. You could only whisper it, and it would be gone. Like, and apply that to the church, apply that to whatever, like the whatever dysfunctional organization, school, like company you may be in. Like, there was a dream once that was X. Like, you could only whisper it.
It's
Yeah,
utopian, isn't it?
it is. But don't we need something to strive for? Like, don't we need the ideals in a way?
Yes. Yeah, I think we've lost sight of them in our culture. I think at a large scale level, where we have very little trust in very few institutions, including the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of criticism, even if you're a practicing Catholic, there's a lot of distrust for church leadership and church authority. And so to believe in, I mean, ultimately you have to believe in the divine dimension of the church alongside the human dimension of it to have any trust whatsoever. But there are no models anymore. There are very few role models to look up to. So even on a personal level, there are no ideals. There are very few archetypes left to try and emulate. You know, I was actually going to ask you this earlier, but we just never got around to it. So you were 17 when you saw this. I was going to ask you, who were your childhood heroes? I imagine Maximus was a childhood hero. But even outside of film, who were they, and have they stood up to the scrutiny as you've grown older? I know for me, my big one was Hulk Hogan. Like Hulkamania Hulk Hogan, not NWO Hulk Hogan. And he's actually become an amazing Christian now, who's turned his life around. I listened to him on Joe Rogan not too long ago. But for a long time, he was living a pretty corrupt life. And as I grew older, I was like, what happened to Hulkamania? Like, I lived my life based on Hulkamania. Do you have anyone?
I mean, I had my dad, in all honesty. There wasn't many like celebrities can say I looked up to in the culture. It's been more fictional characters, honestly. It's been the Bruce Waynes, it's been the Maximus. So that's even interesting, like saying that out loud. Like, there wasn't any celebrity that I looked up to that I was crushed by when I discovered.
Well, Hulkamania was a fictional character too.
Sure.
It wasn't the real Hulk Hogan. And I think, the reason why I want to explore art and the projections that we have onto art and ask people what their favorite films are is because I think that the psychological impacts, especially during our youth, is not explored well enough and is underrated. To this day, as I get older and balder and fatter and less competent, and there's less space for me on a battlefield than there used to be. Now, what is competency for me? Competency for me now is wisdom. That's a core male question. That goes right back to Dagobah and Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
That first modeling for me of that's what I wanted to become. And that's what somewhere in my mind, the grandfather figure was always there as a man or a masculine figure worthy of respect. And it came from fiction. And so I think art plays such a pivotal role in our development. I don't think we give it enough attention.
And Star Wars, this is another hour conversation, but that's like loaded with archetypes. But my kids watching Empire for the first time were just dying laughing at Yoda. And when you don't know anything about Yoda, like, he is such a little punk at the onset of that movie, because he's just stealing food and hitting R2, and it's like the comedic element is great.
But the humility, it was his power was hidden. And in 1979, or I forget which Empire came out, I think it was 79.
Yep.
No one knew, and you're watching that scene for the first time, you didn't know that he was a powerful Jedi. Like the humility that came with that character, just always admire it.
Which I think so many films have lost, because, like, Gladiator was, fantastic, and some years later 300 came out, and that for me was a noticeable turn in, like, the hyper masculine. Like, Maximus didn't need six-pack abs. But from that movie on, from 300 on, from that point on, like, every superhero, every male action star, like, it just has gotten progressively more, like, jacked or unrealistic, or, yeah, to your point, like, the wise figures, I see less and less of them.
Yes.
It's more these caricatures.
Or they're not male. There's a lot of female wise figures out there in film, but you don't find a lot of males left. Or they're like I just watched this television series, Ahsoka, and it's there's a droid in it. That's the wisdom figure. That is technically male, but it's not a human being.
Right.
It's a droid.
Right.
Right. So it's hard to find. Well, I'm gonna keep striving for it. Hopefully, I'll get there.
You just need a cane and a swamp, and you're almost there.
That's the dream.